Hello, everyone. Today is December 11th, 2021. I'm here with Anthony Simeonov. Anthony is a PhD student at Massachusetts Institute of Technology for Robotics and Machine Learning. Thanks for coming on the podcast, Anthony.
Thanks for having me, Karush. It's super nice to be here and see you for the first time in quite a while.
Yes, we were saying we haven't seen each other since we had like 3 or 4 run-ins over the period of like 2 or 3 years after I left school and before you went to MIT.
Exactly. And then add on top of that all of the pandemic time of actually having moved. So it's been many years now, but
yes, it has.
Yeah.
When did you move to MIT Boston?
Yeah, so Cambridge. I live in Cambridge.
Okay.
Just across the river from Boston. That was middle of 2019. So I finished UCSD in 2019, like class of 2019. That was my 5th year. And then I did some stuff over the summer and moved here at the end of the summer that year.
Okay. Yeah. What did you do that summer?
I traveled.
Nice.
I did not work. Yeah, that was like the first summer in a while that I had not tried to do like some internship or some research opportunity thing. I spent a month doing like a semi-solo backpacking thing through Europe. And that was like my first proper like travel experience. I never did any study abroad thing, and I'd gone to Bulgaria once or twice with my dad in the past, but besides that, it was like a kind of the first international experience, and it was really, really, really important and good that I got to do that.
Nice.
Yeah, so that was like a month-long trip, and I saw people that I saw Julian Medry on that trip, and Aragon, French Aragon, if you remember.
Yes. Where'd you meet up with them?
Yeah, they were doing their own like duo backpacking thing, checking out these eco-village things that are set up out there in various places. And we crossed paths twice. We spent like a day and a night together in Greece. We met up in Athens, and then we went to Mykonos and like did the whole like party all night till 7 a.m. in Mykonos. And then he had a friend on another island called Tinos, which is not well known, and it's like a little more low-key and quiet. And it was just this amazing like day on a Greek island. So that was the first day, and then we met up again a few days later in Florence, in Italy.
Okay.
And that was also really cool. Yeah. So yeah, that was a really important time for me to just like see stuff that's out there, like take some time for myself. And the whole second half of that trip, I was actually like fully like alone. Like I met up with friends in the first half and some family, but then for the remaining 2 weeks, I was just doing my own thing. So it was really, really good.
How was being alone, traveling alone?
It was like really liberating, but also pretty scary to realize how challenging it is to put yourself out there and like try to interact with just, I don't know, new people or new situations. I found it pretty doable to meet people socially and get to know them in like hostile environments. I found that you can do a lot by staying in a hostel that has a reputation for having like a good communal atmosphere. That helped a lot. So those parts were really, really nice. I met some incredible people, and we had like a lot of fun together. And then, I mean, also just doing my own thing was really nice too. Like go wander off and explore cities on my own, or go out to various music events or clubs on my own and be able to like do my own thing. So that half of things was nice too. But somewhere in the middle, there was like, oh, I want to be able to engage with, I don't know, with the people I'm running into, or just like, I want to have someone that I'm sharing this with that's not just like in the hostile environment, but like just out there in the world, whatever you're doing. And in those times, it's like, oh yeah, it's pretty hard to just be in a completely new spot alone. It's really all on you to initiate interactions with people. And
Yes.
that's something I've always struggled with, is being the initiator of a social interaction. I can do it better when other people invite me to participate in something, or a situation just puts us together where you're going to interact whether you want to or not. That's fine. But you know, there's other people out there that are like always really down to just go chat up strangers in places wherever they wherever they are. They don't feel like any hesitancy about doing that. So that part was tough. And a big takeaway from that was like, okay, I'm moving to this new place. When I come home, that seems like a great thing to just kind of, I don't know, work on, like find ways to feel more comfortable and confident with the act of engaging with people out there in the world.
Yes.
And not like waiting for them to come to you, but being
Yes.
like an active participant in how you relate to your external environment. I was really excited to like try to do more of that when I came out here after those travels. That was like a takeaway from the travel experience. But of course, moving to a new place and then starting a crazy grad school program, the first several months there just wasn't really time or headspace to really do that. And then so soon after that was COVID. So that plan kind of got squashed for like all that time since I had it in mind. And only now recently is it kind of coming back to my mind, where there's an opportunity to um, resume that type of, let's say, that aspect of like I don't know, personal development.
Yes. That's not easy. Like you've said, going out, making, putting yourself in a vulnerable position. Some people might not want to speak to you, and then they're just like, no, thanks. And just like it hurts a little to get rejected like that, but it's still, I think it's really important that, and it gives us a lot more opportunities to bond with other people. And if, I've traveled alone as well, and it's not easy. It's like, you know, like you said, it's easier or nicer to share those experiences with someone. But if we don't have anyone, then it's on us to find some sort of connection in the environment we're in.
Yeah, exactly. And time affects things too. Like you go to a new place and then you like stay there for a really long time. Eventually things will happen, but when you have like this window that you want to get
Yes.
the most out of that opportunity, because it's going to end kind of soon, it comes much more down to your willingness to put yourself out there. You can't like wait for life and it's like randomness and serendipity to take care of things for you. Sometimes you have to
No.
kind of force the issue a little more. So yeah. Um, yeah, I don't know, what kind of travel have you been traveling lately, or have you just been, where are you right now?
Right
Where,
now, I'm in Orange County, but I'm still in San Diego. I live
okay.
in San Diego. Um, Still in, pretty close to downtown. And I haven't traveled a lot. My first job out of college, I was doing a lot of traveling, a lot of international solo traveling,
Mm,
because I would go somewhere for work. I'd be there with my teammates, and then afterwards, I'd maybe take 5 to 10 days
mm,
in some international place. I went to, one time me and my coworker went to Thailand together, and that was actually incredible because, we were in Thailand together. And then, but then another time I went to South Africa by myself, which is, you know, luckily I had an Airbnb with an older lady as a host, and she was really nice. But still, I mean, when I was there for 5 days, and it's true, like if you want to make some connection, like if I wanted to know the way South African people actually think and act and talk, I have to go out there and talk to these people. I have to, engage them because, it goes both ways, that intimidation factor. It's like they're intimidated to say something to us because they don't want to get rejected. We don't want to get rejected by them. And it's it's okay if we get rejected.
Totally. Yeah. It's you're gonna survive that.
Yes, you're going to
But
survive
somehow
that.
something in the mind gets very nervous about actually facing that possibility of the bad thing that might happen if they don't like the way that I approach them or whatever. Just something about that. So, um, yeah. So that's what I did. That was my traveling. That's the bulk of the actual traveling I've ever done, and it was really really nice. And it was just really important to get some time in between finishing undergrad and starting stuff here.
Nice.
Yeah.
And you said it was really important because this was one of the first times you had given yourself, you'd put away time for yourself. Whereas summers previously, you were, working in programs, you were working in internships. I remember you worked at least one summer for Disney, correct?
Yeah, that's right. I spent two like 3-month internships at Disney in their R&D, like the R&D side of their Imagineering department. The first one was actually in the fall. So the reason I did a fifth year in the first place is because I took a quarter off to do that first Disney internship, and then that went really well, and I wanted to go back, so I went back for the following summer after that as well.
You
Um,
took a quarter off for it.
yeah, I did it in the
Wow.
fall instead of like in the summer, which is something that's, I don't know, I want to say highly underrated. I know that some people are on a real constraint of finishing school in a certain amount of time because of maybe like a financial situation, like paying an extra year of tuition might just not be in the cards for people. That's definitely a reality. But for folks where there is more of that flexibility, I feel like it was so good to not force myself to finish a full engineering program in 4 years and to like create that extra buffer of time to put more in for the sake of exploring different opportunities and actually getting to enjoy my last few years. Um, so yeah, so that was a great thing in my opinion. I was really happy with that choice. Um, on both sides, in terms of like school giving you opportunities, and also in terms of the internship itself. Like summer internships are way more competitive, oftentimes, than if you are able to swing like a fall or spring time. Like there's less people wanting to do that, and so you can, I guess, a little like if the company's willing to do that for you, you can have an easier time getting your foot in the door and not needing to like outcompete some other people that also want that internship slot, which is really really valuable when you're sort of starting yourself up. um, getting those first few like really exciting internship roles or whatever opportunities you want out there. Like it's always hard to do the first ones. So I found that really helpful too. I guess a weird thing doing it in the fall is that you don't really have the cohort vibe of like in the summer, like a lot of people come to interns, so there's that community of interns, and then you can all hang out together as interns, and sometimes that's really something that people like a lot. So I guess you don't necessarily get that as much, but you do get kind of also get more attention because there's less people there. Like the people that you're working with can get to know them a little more closely. So
Which is
like
huge.
there was many aspects of that fall internship that were kind of like game changers for me. And so I think back on that really positively in terms of how it ended up going. So yeah.
What what types of game changers?
Um, well, that was my first time getting to see what it looks like to do research at a company. I had been working in a lab at UCSD for like a year and a half before that already, and that was my first foray into knowing what is research. Like if you go to UCSD and then they tell you like, oh, this is this great research institution, and I'm like, I don't know what that means, guys. Like, what does, like, I can someone explain that to me? No one like taught me what's this notion of a research university. So it took me time to even figure out that in its most basic form in academia. And at that point, after some time in that lab, I was involved on some projects that got published. Um, and over the course of that time, I'm like, okay, no, I get it now. We work on these new things, then we try to write it up and we share it with the community and get feedback via peer review, and eventually, it'll get published at a conference or a journal, and then you rinse and repeat. And I'm like, okay, cool. That's research. But then you go and realize there's slightly different versions of that that have like pretty different end goals in mind. So when you're doing that in academia, you stop at the paper, to be honest. Like you work on a project, you write it up, you try to get it accepted somewhere. If it's like a smallish project, the paper might be like 6 to 8 pages, and that'll go to like a conference. Maybe you go to the conference and present it, and that's really what it ends. Or if it's a big project, maybe it goes to a journal, and those are usually longer. But once that's done, then it's over. And so you stop and you start the new thing. But what was fascinating to see at the company, so at Disney, in their research and engineering pipeline, is like they want the promising projects to keep going. So there's this like middle space of tech transfer that happens that's like super, super interesting and really exciting, which is where like those research projects that you're working on, some of them still go to papers. Like Disney research was still relatively academic when I was there. So some people did publish. A lot of stuff doesn't get published and it gets written as a patent instead, so that it stays more like internal. And then there's like a bunch of demos that have to happen. You like your product that you make as a researcher is like, oh, some executive from the company is gonna like come take a tour, and they're gonna look at your thing that you're working on for like 10 minutes. And you have to like impress them because they're the ones that are going to decide how much funding this part of the engineering organization gets in the future. And so you get all geared up for these demos for like internal people with influence. And if that goes well, like they have a vision in mind of like, we want Disney theme parks to keep blowing the minds of like children and families all over the world. And so if they like what you did, then they're gonna put resources behind it to keep it going. And you get to then see like, okay, yeah, I made this kind of cool demo, but it's kind of hacky, it's kind of unsafe, it's kind of expensive, it doesn't look that good. You then have to take next steps and fix all those things. So you get like real engineers involved, you get more money, you get like artistic people involved to try to come up with a demo, like a next version of the demo that will look and have like a more exciting real world quality to it. So overall, what I'm trying to say is that it gave me a taste of what R&D can look like in the context of like a larger organization that actually wants to do things in the real world and not just stop at a paper being published. And that was really cool for me. That was kind of what helped me take more seriously the idea of going to grad school and pursuing a PhD, was that like the people I was working with had the title research scientist or research engineer, and they had PhDs, but then they were getting to work in this environment where, I mean, I loved those internships. Like I had so much fun. I learned so much. It's like just really, really high quality people around you to collaborate with and learn from. So I was like, damn, I would not mind ending up where you are. Or at least given what I know right now. Like it might change along the way, and it kind of has changed along the way, where I still think it could be cool to be a research scientist at a company, but there's other things in mind too now that I couldn't have known back then that might also be interesting. But yeah, so that's maybe the biggest reason of why it was like a big deal to get that experience under my belt and actually open my mind up to various possibilities of what you could do down the line in that space of like robotics research.
That's a huge insight, I think, to gain, to realize if you create something that people value, they'll put money behind it and support you and give you the resources. I mean, especially Disney because they're such a wealthy company. But, still, I think even if you think about what's going on with the current venture capital space, it's pretty similar, but there's a lot more trust because you're an actual intern for Disney. But it's still the same concept. If you create something that people see value in, that people think, that amazes people, even if it's, like you said, hacking, kind of dangerous, little expensive, that's the prototype. And if that executive sees value, and he's going to fund you, he's going to support you, he's going to realize that you have an innovative mind and can really move some products forward that people want.
Yeah, exactly. And that's just really different from academia. Academia is there's way more like, oh, we just did this for the sake of doing it because no one has done it before. And that's important. Like you do need a space for that where you can just explore with no incentive other than exploration in mind. Like there does not exist another realm where that's possible and supported, I think. So it's good, but it also has its downsides in terms of, I don't know, just like the impact of what you work on being kind of more often than not pretty limited, and it gets pretty easy to get pretty like existential when you're struggling on a research project as like a grad student or someone in academia, and it's not going well at the moment, and you're grinding, and you're like, you have to be careful about zooming out and asking questions about like, why am I doing this? Because you can't easily tell yourself that like, oh well, it's okay, like I'm adding value to um, this company or this person's life, because like you really aren't necessarily, you really are just kind of doing something because it hasn't been done before and you thought it could be a good idea to at least try it to see what happened. So there's so much more internal motivation that you have to cultivate to keep yourself engaged with a research project when you don't have that like value added incentive that you can be working towards in like that industrial environment, um, which again has its pros and cons. Sometimes that's like the best thing ever. I think that's the good side of the experience of being an academic in the university system is that you have that freedom. So if you have something that you're stoked about that no one else actually thinks is valuable, but like you just have a hunch that maybe it is, or maybe you don't think it's valuable, but you're just fascinated by it, that's enough. Like that's enough for you to rationalize why it's an okay thing for you to now like spend time working on that problem and learning more about it or whatever. So that, I mean, that can be really cool too. It's just that uh, that has to always be renewed. That internal connection to your work is like the most important thing to have in this space when you don't have the end product in mind, the money incentive in mind, or the like, we're going to create some magical experience for other people, like that. None of that really is there. So that's pretty different.
That is very different. And when other people, it's a bit less rewarding. So I understand when you say, you have to have a lot more internal motivation, because if an executive comes in and tells you this is great, that's a huge, reward. Like that's like I don't know, our brains, like that's big.
Yes, that's a nice dopamine hit for sure. Yeah.
Yes. But then it's like, I can imagine, like halfway through this project that you're doing in school and you're like, this is probably not going to help anyone. I don't even know if this is worth my time.
Yes. Yeah.
What do you do there? Do you just keep on grinding? Or you said you have to be careful about stepping back.
Yeah, yeah, um, I mean, you have to have some reason. You have to have some reason. So to keep going. If it's worth continuing to keep going, there's got to be some reason. And it's like you just said, oftentimes it's the reason is not because, oh, this is going to really help people or like impact the world in a exciting big way. So if that's not the reason, then what is the reason? You have to check in and see like, okay, at the very least, am I still interested in this? Um, within the little pocket of other people within the academic community that work on similar stuff, like you can ask yourself, would they even care? Like, maybe there's like 5 to 10 other people out there somewhere in the world that write similar papers that you do, and at the very least you want them to be maybe interested in the direction that you're taking things. So that's some way to kind of check in with yourself, is like, I'll think about people that I admire in the field whose work I really learned from, and then I'll say, okay, if I'm going in this direction and I'm questioning it, like, I don't know, like, what would that person think of it? What might they say in terms of giving feedback to adjust the direction or things like that. If you're just really stuck, like, it can sometimes not be about the motivation piece, but it can just be about like, okay, I just got to get fucking unstuck. And like, these are hard problems we work on, and it's impossible for one person to know everything, especially when they're
Yes.
they're still the student. So in that case, it becomes about um, removing any ego about feeling embarrassed about being stuck and just being like, hey, let me find help. Let me tell my advisors I'm stuck. Let me find some other collaborators in the lab who might know something. Whatever. Like, there's so many smart people that know so many different things and have perspectives that come from different backgrounds. So that's really important in those times of being like, I don't know, feeling frustrated or like things are not going well, is just getting help. That's always huge. And that can
Huge.
also be that's obviously big in terms of the technical challenge you're facing and getting help to overcome the like the technical problem, but it's also helpful in terms of the mental side. Like, it's so easy to get down on yourself when you're stuck on a problem. You feel bad that you couldn't figure it out, and that makes it worse. No one's doing Oftentimes I don't think we're doing better at solving big problems in our work or in our lives when we're like feeling down about ourselves as people or as workers. That probably just exacerbates. Um, so having someone come in and help, but then also just like be encouraging and be friendly
Yes.
and tell you about how it was when they were learning this stuff, and you realize like, oh, okay, yeah, it was hard for you to get to this point as well. Like, I don't know, all those little things just add up a lot. Um, but then still at the end of the day, there could be a time where you're like, no, I've kind of exhausted most of my options. I've tried to get help. I've tried to figure out an angle on this problem that makes it more interesting to me, or that makes it more likely to be received well by other members of the academic community. And still, you're like, I just don't think this is interesting, or I just don't think this is a worthwhile thing to keep hammering on. That's super fine. And at some point, it's okay to like let something go and try to pivot into a different direction. That happens all the time. Um,
Okay.
but it's hard. It's not easy to like know when to I don't know, cut that cord. So
It's not easy. And there's a I forgot what this is called. It might be I don't think it's called the loser's bias, but it's something where you've invested so much time and energy.
it's like sunk cost fallacy.
That's it. Sunk
Yeah,
cost fallacy. That's it.
yeah, yeah.
That's super real, I bet, for these types of projects.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, yeah. You spend a bunch of time, and then you're like, oh God, like I've already spent so much time. I got to get at least something out of this. But I don't know. It's like it's hard. Like, sometimes that doesn't pan out, to just force yourself to try to wrap something up, because that's kind of the nature of these research projects, is there's not a well-defined end. you start the project literally not knowing how it's going to go, and definitely not knowing how it's going to end. You better at least have some notion of how it's going to go in the very beginning. Otherwise, like, that's not a
smart initiative to
yeah,
take on.
that's not a good place to be in if you literally know zero. But it's so hard to be able to make long-term predictions about how projects are going to go. So if you're right in the middle and you're like, oh, I've already spent this many months, like, I'll just finish it, like, that could lead to another several months of still nothing, and then now you're in double deep. So
Wow.
so yeah, that's a real thing for sure.
Okay. Wow. That's and being a teenager, we definitely don't understand sunk cost value. We're just like, I spent all this time, I'm going. I'm still going.
Yeah. Headstrong. Yeah.
So were these, for Disney and your academic internships, were those also robotics and artificial intelligence?
They were all robotics. I've been in this robotic space since I started, in my first time being in a research lab. Not artificial intelligence or machine learning. That came in later. But yeah, so I was really only a member of one lab at UCSD. It was called the Advanced Robotics and Controls Lab. And they mainly focused on robotics in the context of like medical applications, like surgical robotics, but also kind of adjacent things. So when I started, I don't know if you remember, I was mechanical engineering at UCSD. So I was working on purely like hardware side of things, building actuators that are similar to how human muscles work, and then trying to understand how you can characterize them and design them to be stronger. And
What's an actuator?
like a motor, like something that you can put some kind of energy in and then get like mechanical motion out, mechanical energy out. So like an electric motor is like the classical, that's like the most common actuators that are out there, where you hook up a battery or plug it into the wall, and then it spins, and that allows you to now like move your robot arm or whatever. So those are really common. There's like a whole big area of research on just other types of actuators. So the ones we were using, they're literally made of nylon, like sewing thread. And people learned that nylon has this property due to the way that, like, this material property, where if you coil it, like twist to the point where it actually becomes kind of like a spring, like coils on itself, and then you heat it up, it will actually contract, kind of like a muscle contracts. So we took this nylon sewing thread, and you can buy nylon sewing thread that's plated with a conductive material. So like silver, I can't remember now what like the conductive material was, but you basically can now hook up a current to it, and such that it will now effectively act like a resistor that just dissipates heat. But while it's dissipating heat, it will heat itself up, and that will actually make it contract. So you can like apply a weight to it and then just run a current through it, and then see the weight kind of move up. And then when you stop the current, you can see the weight fall back down. And so I was working on that when I started out. It's like zero machine learning, zero, like I didn't even know what robotics was. It's an incredibly diverse and broad field. So that's like the kind of on the farthest end of the spectrum in terms of almost all hardware and design and like the mechy side. And then I did that for a while, and then the Disney internship was kind of the first time that I got to do a robotics thing that was a little more in the other direction. So I can't talk about the projects we did because they're all locked down about like NDA stuff, and we never published anything from those things. But that became much more just like Mechatronics project where we had like an idea in mind of this kind of cool mechanism that you could build, and my supervisor had the idea. He thought it would be really interesting, but he just needed someone to actually like build a prototype and do some experiments and see if it did what he thought it would do. So that was then
What's Mechatronics?
It's like the combination of, so you can break it down like mechanical engineering. So that would be just like building stuff. And then tronics is like electronics. So it's kind of like electromechanical systems where you're going to have motors and mechanical components that move and maybe do something physical in the way they interact with the world. But then you're going to have like some sort of electrical components that are interfacing with those mechanical bits, and probably some kind of microcontroller, Arduino type thing, like usually for these like hobby level mechatronics projects, you know, hook up the Arduino to some motor drivers and then program it so that you can make the motors move in some way. Like it's kind of like your most basic robot that doesn't have any sort of intelligence or perception or like planning capability built into it on the algorithm side. It's just like the hardware part of the hardware plus electronics part of like a robotic system, I think of as kind of like mechatronics. So, and maybe it has like a low level controller, like it has something that you can tell it to move from like, having its joint at 90 degrees to like, 0 degrees. Like you can maybe have it can have like that level of intelligence, but it's not really intelligence. That's just like a controller.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was working on that. And at that time I started getting really interested in more of the controls and software side of the field. I learned pretty early on that I didn't really like mechanical design.
Wow.
I was just doing it to get experience under my belt and have opportunities to learn more different things. But I was really keen on just pivoting in that direction of more programming and control systems and being on the software implementation side of a system that you're going to like try to make it move in some interesting way in the physical world, but you're going to have to like write some code to make that happen. I found that pretty fun. So the Disney thing was moving more in that direction. And by the time I got back and was able to start some new stuff in the lab, I completely bailed on the artificial muscles thing. And only at that point did I even give it a shot to try to see like what's going on in this machine learning space. So I took some classes on some like specific types of machine learning techniques and started working with some grad students that wanted to do some machine learning for robotic stuff. And I would say kind of ever since then, I kind of knew like, oh my God, yeah, this is what I want to do. I think this is like fascinating to see how these things can get integrated together. So.
Absolutely. A control system, I think where controls, I don't know, you probably know better, but the control system for a complex robotic system has got to be difficult to create.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's difficult to create, but I think for the most part, it is doable. Like people know how to do it. People do it all the time when they build robots that get deployed in real world settings. Like the place where robots actually exist nowadays are on assembly lines and in manufacturing facilities. And those robots have control systems. They have motors. They have controllers running like really fast control code that is making sure that the robot moves where it's supposed to move and doesn't break itself and doesn't run into itself and let's say maybe stops when it feels a force that's too big. Like those are things that are definitely hard in terms of you have to do the engineering to set it up and build the whole system, but there's not
by engineering, do you mean like say you have to tell an arm to not move into itself? You actually have to know the dimensions and the weight and all that
Yeah,
of the arm?
exactly. Yeah. So that's the big thing, is that when you're just thinking about the arm and you know exactly what you want it to do in terms of, move to this spot and then, I don't know, screw in this screw, or like do this welding pattern or something. You make sure that you know everything about the arm, you know everything about its shape, about how heavy it is, about how the motors work, how fast the motors can move, how much force the motors can apply. You know everything about the task, like you know exactly where that uh, car door is going to come and be, and you know precisely where you're going to want the tip of the robot to go to, do whatever thing it needs to do with that part. So when you know everything, it just becomes a matter of, well, let's say when you know everything, then you can model everything. You can build a big kind of model that represents all the stuff that's happening in the environment and all the stuff that's happening with the robot, and then you can build a control system around that model. That is like classical control design. Is I have a model of the system, and now I'm going to try to write like a feedback law that changes the commands that get sent to all the motors based on some task that I want to achieve, and taking into account the behavior of the model. You can figure out what should be the commands that you send, and you can do it. So that's what I mean by engineering, is like it's there's no big technical problems that prevent you from doing it. It's just purely engineering effort that needs to be spent in characterizing the system accurately and building a good model, and then building a good controller, and then like verifying that it works. The space where machine learning comes in and becomes very interesting is when anything in that scenario that I described becomes, let's say, unknown or like variable, where the location of the part that the robot needs to interact with is actually not specified in advance. It could be in one spot, or it could be in another spot, or it could be even in a different orientation, or it could even be a different part that has never been seen before. So we've seen similar parts, but we've never seen that exact part. And we still have to have the robot figure out how to do its task without, destroying itself, without being unsafe, just while being efficient. All these things. There's a lot to say in terms of all the things that need to happen to achieve the task successfully, but that's really the hard part, and that's where people are really, really, really big on using machine learning techniques to try to handle those types of scenarios. The term that people use is, the things that people say is, we want robots to be able to operate in unstructured environments. Basically, when things can change a lot more and be more variable, then you need something that's a lot more flexible in its ability to actually perceive what's going on, and then think and decide about, okay, well, here's what the behavior that I need to do to achieve some task. That's where things are at these days in research, and that's why you don't really see robotic systems deployed anywhere out there in the world, other than in those settings where everything is kind of fixed and exactly repeated the same way over and over and over again.
It's because they don't have the intelligence yet to handle variability and unknowns.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And when you say model, is that a CAD model?
A CAD model can be part of it, but so no, I'm saying I'm using model in a much more broad sense. Like I'm thinking like physics model, where when you learn Newton's second law in physics class, like F equals ma, that is essentially a model that can tell you, if I apply this much force, this is what the acceleration can be, and then therefore I can actually like predict how that object with mass m will move over some amount of time. So like that F equals ma equation, that's like my model of the world. The CAD model comes in when we think about, well, now what's the geometry of that object with mass m? So the dynamics are important. F equals ma, that's the dynamics, but also the geometry and the constraints that are implied by the geometry are also really important. So like if an object is shaped in some really funky way, that actually changes how I can apply forces to it. I have to decide. I can only apply forces through making contact, right? So I can't just apply arbitrary forces if I don't come in and make contact. But I also don't want to, I don't know, collide with the object in a really unsafe way. So if the object is shaped in a certain way, I can't move like inside of it, but I can't just move to the outside of it because then I won't apply any force. So both of those things, the dynamics of how input forces relate to like motion, that's like part of the model of how the system will work. But then also the geometry is, so thinking about like a model of the geometry, and that's most oftentimes traditionally represented as like a CAD model or like a mesh, a 3D mesh.
Okay. Yeah. And so, dang, I forgot what I was going to ask. Wow. Oh, F equals ma. That's a big part of robotics.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, well, like traditionally, yes. That's the part of robotics that we know how to do. That's physics.
What do you mean know how to do?
So when you mentioned the comment about, oh, we know how our robot is shaped, and we know how its motors behave, and so on. So like if all that we want the robot to do is move to a specific place in the world and there's nothing else going on in the environment, we can basically write that down as a big expanded out version of F equals ma. There will be forces that get applied at all of the joints. Those are our motors. The m will be some generalized notion of like the mass of all of the links on the robot based on their how heavy they are and their shape. So they'll have like some mass and some inertia that relates, how forces and torques applied to them, how those relate to like how the object would like move and rotate, and then the A will basically relate to then how the whole system moves at the you can think about it at the level of at each individual joint. So like, okay, this is how fast each of my joints is going to move, or it can be, you can think about it in the perspective of the sort of the end tip of the robot. This is how the end tip is going to move. When I say that, that's like what we know how to do, is like, that's basically what's running in all those assembly line scenarios. They wrote down F equals ma for the robot because they knew everything about the robot. They knew its shape. They had the CAD model. They knew the mass. They knew how to write down that big equation such that then they could build a control system around that big equation that allows them to do very accurate and precise control. Okay. So when you ask, oh, that's a big part of robotics, like certainly that's a huge part of robotics in terms of how you actually control the robot itself. Where that's a little bit less so used these days is on the side of when you try to make the robot be intelligent and actually think at a higher level about achieving its task. A lot of people still do think that it's really, really useful and important to put the notion of physics, like what we know about physics, into the reasoning engine of the robot, because people hypothesize that if you need to like teach the robot everything from scratch, that's always going to do worse than if you can build in certain like prior knowledge about how things work in the world, that should only help if the robot knows how physics works in terms of its thinking. So F equals ma is also still used on that side as well in terms of like trying to make them intelligent. But when you bring in machine learning, a lot of people then also say like, no, let's not impose some like too much structure on how the intelligence reasoning engine needs to operate, and let's just like allow the robot to learn at a much higher level to figure out how inputs from the sensors should then relate to like outputs at the actuators, in a way that basically completely bypasses some explicit notion of F equals ma.
Okay.
I'm getting a little in the weeds here, perhaps, in terms of this being intuitive and landing, but the high level is that physics of the world is what you're dealing with when you're trying to make your robot interact with the world. And so, yes, it's a big part to like try to incorporate some notion of physics in how you control it. But there's also challenges associated with doing that when you want to actually make the robot be intelligent in its ability to take like camera images and then perceive the environment and then reason intelligently about what it should then do to complete the task. There's some difficulty in like putting physics in that part. And so some people are interested in kind of bypassing putting physics in that part and just like learning that part with, modern machine learning techniques.
Do you know what the difficulty is there?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big difficulties is that let's try to explain this simply. So when you write down F equals ma, what I'm gonna call that the dynamics of the system. F equals ma is the dynamics. So when you write down the dynamics of the system, you are kind of talking about the world in terms of some state variables. So you basically say that the world consists of these things that can move, and so I'm gonna keep track of how they move. I'm going to keep track of their position. I'm going to keep track of their orientation. And I think one of the big things that's really hard, so something that I should emphasize more clearly along the way here is that, like I said, when things change and can be variable and unstructured in the environment, what you need to do is you need to put a perception system in. The robot has to like look at what's actually happening and then make a decision based on what it's seeing, right? It can't just,
A perception system would be a camera.
for example, a camera. Another type of sensor that's used in the autonomous driving space is LiDAR,
Okay.
which is gives you a different type of signal than a camera. But yes, let's say a camera. That's the most common.
Okay.
So you need to put a camera on the robot that can watch and take images of like what's going on, and then realize like, okay, so this is how the world looks now, and it has some notion of what it's supposed to achieve in the long term of its task. What's traditionally done is you take that camera image and you have some way to then figure out an estimate of the state of everything in the world. And once you have an estimate of the state of everything in the world, then you can plug that into that dynamics and do some sort of reasoning and planning for what action should be taken that would get me like closer to my goal. This is a little bit hard to explain from a super high level, but basically when things in the world can change so dramatically, it's hard to even have a proper notion of the state of the world, like how you even represent the state of the world when you might be presented with a scenario that you've literally never seen before. So in those cases, the state estimation problem actually becomes like really, really hard. And so that's, I think, one of the big places where imposing a dynamics model that has a very particular structure and assumes very particular state variables can actually be limiting, because now you're forcing yourself to try to reason about how the world works in terms of those very specific state variables. But estimating those very specific state variables might be like kind of a fundamentally ill-posed problem when you're presented with images of of something happening that you've literally never seen before. You don't even have a proper notion of how you can figure out what the state of the world is. So like a slightly more concrete example that I can give that's like less high level is so I work in the space of manipulation, where the thing you actually need to do is, like I said, like make contact with objects in the environment to, like, let's say, rearrange them into some organized way. So like right now I have my laptop in front of me, and it's like, okay, maybe I've seen some laptops in the past, but I've never seen this one. And I'm the robot, and now I'm put in front of this desk, and I'm told to like declutter the desk, like put everything away on the shelf. So one of the things I have to do is put this laptop like away. I have to maybe put it in some spot where the laptop goes. If I've never seen it before, it's really hard to have any proper idea of how you would characterize the state of this laptop. Like, what is the state of the laptop if I've never seen this thing before? I can say it has some position and orientation in the world, but that's like completely arbitrary when it's just like this new thing that I've never seen. And so people, it's kind of a crazy idea, or at least I thought it was a crazy idea when I first learned about it. But people are really interested in completely bypassing that notion of estimating the state of the laptop or the objects in the world and saying, okay, let's instead just take the image, which is like a big array of RGB pixel values, and let's then train neural networks that consume these images and directly produce an output that tells the robot what it should do next. And the hypothesis is that that's actually a more general way for you to be able to handle scenarios that have objects that have never been seen before. Because if I've seen in the past like 10,000 examples of interacting with different laptops in different ways and putting them away, it's possible that it's actually the neural network learned something that can handle like a slightly differently shaped object and still output a reasonable action that allows it to achieve its task without taking all those intermediate steps of trying to like first estimate its state and then plug it into some model that describes the dynamics. So yeah, so tell me if I'm getting a little too in the details of this, because it's hard to explain this stuff without as much of the background context. But those are a few of the high level aspects. Is that understanding the state of a world where you've never even seen the things that are in that world before is pretty hard. And so people are really interested in learning ways to directly go from the signal that the sensor receives and then directly output something that the robot can do in terms of the action and taking it closer to the goal. That's not really working yet either. Like, it's still very much in research. Like, both of those things people are trying to solve, improving like the traditional pipeline of estimating the state and then running a planning algorithm to then decide what to do next, versus just training neural networks to directly go from like pixels to actions. Both of those things are like very active still in the research community.
Okay. So is that the current blocker, the current impedance in robotics is the intelligence of these systems?
Yeah, I would say the intelligence, and specifically linking the intelligence to real world perception, like
Okay.
real world sensors.
Real world what?
Sensors,
Oh,
like cameras.
okay.
You can get robots to actually be pretty intelligent in simulators
What do you
because,
mean by simulator?
like, in a simulation, I know everything about the world. I know everything's shape. I know everything's state. I know there's no uncertainty in anything. So in those cases, you can actually build really intelligent algorithms that allow the robot to achieve like pretty interesting goals and complete tasks that would be very useful. The big challenge comes in when you like put a camera on the robot and you put it in a real world environment where there's just a lot of variability and a lot of, I guess, noise that can happen. So I would say that's the biggest block, is connecting algorithms that can produce intelligent behavior to actual perception components.
Okay. And you mentioned two perception components, cameras and LiDAR. Do you think one is going to, do you think one will overtake the other in how, which one's implemented?
Yeah. Um, so another version of LiDAR that we use in like manipulation is just like depth cameras. It's the same idea where you, instead of every pixel having like a RGB color, every pixel has basically just like a depth value that tells you how far away something was at that point in space from like the camera lens. Um, there's trade-offs. I think a lot of people want RGB cameras to be the winner of that because they're a lot cheaper and um, they can see things more easily that depth cameras can't see very easily.
Like what?
The common examples are like transparent objects or objects with really thin features, or like reflective objects.
Like a
Most of
screen door?
Yeah, screen doors are super hard for a depth camera to perceive. Um, and the reason for that is the way they usually work is by sending out some light, and then the light will go out and then bounce back, and then it will measure, something about how long it took to bounce back. So anything where the light that gets sent out gets like messed up because it passes through the transparent thing, or it bounces off in a weird way because it's reflective, or it's just really noisy because it's so thin. Um, all of those things really mess up the fidelity of the signal you get from the depth sensor. Whereas you can see those things all pretty easily in color images.
Yes.
So that's a big thing that people think about, is using RGB only and not using depth. However, what is oftentimes still really useful is to make a prediction of the depth image from the RGB image. So
Okay.
it's not great to just take color values and then try to just work with like color, uh, like just describe the world in terms of like the color of all these different points in space. That's leaves out a lot of information about the geometry of the world. So
Yes.
still really great if you can build up a more geometry oriented representation. And so that's a pretty active thing right now, is trying to take RGB images and then train neural networks in various ways to then be able to predict a depth image that is actually a lot more accurate than the depth image you would get directly from a depth sensor. So for example, in that case, like you could look at the screen door in terms of just taking a picture with the camera but then you could actually build a system that then tries to figure out like the 3D location of all of the really thin features on the screen door.
Okay.
And that would be pretty useful potentially.
What do you mean by thin features?
Like the screen door is like this thing of, I guess, so when I'm thinking of the screen door, I'm thinking of
Like a mesh
like a
door?
like something where there's a bunch of pieces of metal that are really, really thin, and they're all kind of like interwoven with each other.
Yes.
And that would just be really hard for you to see that with, like, it would be hard for you to figure out the 3D location of all of the actual parts of that door. If you just directly looked at it with like a LiDAR or a depth camera. But if you looked at it with an RGB camera, you would definitely be able to see it. And then because you can see it, then you can train a system to actually then just predict the location of all of the parts of the door.
That makes sense too. And because, we're intelligent beings and we take in color, and
Yeah.
it's a huge part of, our ability to perceive depth. It's not the whole picture,
Yeah.
but, that's also another reason that, when you were saying it's a common practice to feed in some sort of models into your system before it attempts to do some work, because that's kind of the same as a human being. We make a lot of assumptions when we do things, and if we didn't make those assumptions and we had to just like learn everything on our own, it would take a lot longer and there'd be a lot more hesitancy.
For sure. Yeah. Absolutely. I think there's different camps in the community, and there's a bunch of people that say like we're so far away from the human ability to build mental models and higher level like abstractions and symbols and heuristics, like that help you take shortcuts, and infer things that are not directly perceived, that could be useful for you to achieve your goal of whatever you need to do.
Literally anything.
Literally anything. Yeah, literally anything. Literally just physically existing in the world and not like like
Hurting yourself by like
completely, yeah, knocking into stuff constantly and not knowing how to like just move stuff around or move your own body around in the most basic ways. That I mean, so that's actually an aspect that I think about a lot, that I kind of feel is undervalued in the machine learning community, is that like there's parts of intelligence that are not even human necessarily, but like that animals also have in their like spatial awareness and their ability to purposefully interact with the physical world to achieve goals and survive and take care of themselves, that I think we're still like really, really far away from in our robotic systems. So I want to spend more time actually reading about what people do in that area of like animal cognitive studies and understanding animal intelligence, because it seems like there's a lot to learn along the way towards building robots that can like I don't know, understand language and do things like understand really, really high level concepts. I think if we just want them to even be able to behave more intelligently in like the pure in the purely like physical space, there's probably a lot to learn from how even like other animal species operate.
Yes, because in order to be able to move around in their environment, a robot doesn't need the brain of a human being. It could take the brain of a fly, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I think it's unclear if we can like actually build full systems that are like as intelligent as something as a fly, something like a fly, or I don't know, whatever other like relatively more primitive species that can actually still do pretty amazing things in terms of its ability to perceive the environment and then behave in interesting ways that that allow it to like go about its life. So yeah, so I'm pretty interested in that. However, a lot of people are thinking differently. Like the field is super excited about language right now because like the non-robotics part of the machine learning research community is like the parts that are being most successful these days are the ones that are working on like language modeling. I don't know if you keep up in this space.
NLP, natural
Yeah,
language
yeah, like
processing.
the NLP folks are doing pretty crazy stuff, and things are really starting to. I don't know. I don't know very much about this space, so like I can be incorrect in the details, but you see some of the results from OpenAI's language models that are able to take in like a text prompt and then predict the next most likely character, and can do this like recursively to generate paragraphs and paragraphs of text that when you read it you're like, wow, some of this sounds pretty human like.
Wow.
And there's other versions of that are now, I think people are even more excited about for robotics, which like link together vision and language. So you take in like a language, like a sentence, and then a neural network is then trained to like predict an image that is related to that sentence. Um, Things like that are starting to kind of work much better than I guess they have in the past, and people seem to be really, really excited about leveraging that for robotics. Um, which that becomes very different than like, oh, we're going to build a robot to behave like an animal. Like that's jumping the gun all the way to the point of like we want to be able to interact with robots and like both specify goals to them in the form of language, but then also maybe have them communicate back to us in the form of language that helps us like interact with them more seamlessly. um, yeah, it'll be really interesting to see like how things go in that area. Like a lot of people are working on that these days.
You know, for me, the most obvious progress in NLP is how much better Siri has become over the last 8 years. I
Yeah,
mean, 8 years ago, you couldn't even speak to it.
right.
And now you can do almost anything with Siri.
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
So, what
yeah, and I mean that's like a whole other side of it. I don't even pay nearly as much attention to things on that side of like um consuming human speech and then translating it. Like the thing I'm talking about is just starting from the perspective of like someone wrote down some
wow.
sentences. But that's a really good point, that on top of that there's been all those advancements in interpreting speech in combination with the language processing. So yeah, it's exciting. And the reason, that's the biggest reason why that's working well, is that there's a lot more data, to train those systems on in those domains.
Versus
Yeah.
previously, there wasn't much data.
Versus in other areas like in robotics, there's not really data that you can train on in like massive quantities to help a robot perceive the world and then take an intelligent action that achieves some task. Like that data doesn't exist, but there's like all the data on the internet, all the words on the internet that you can train a language model on, so that it can then actually figure out how to predict reasonable sentences or interpret language in like in a more intelligent way.
Okay.
So that's like the big thing these days too in machine learning. Is just like people are realizing that data is just massively important in comparison
Yes.
to like algorithms or like architectures of neural networks. Things are kind of converging across a lot of different spaces where they used to have different like specialized architectures for vision tasks and for language tasks and for other types of tasks. And now they're realizing like you can take like pretty simple general purpose architectures that just seem to be really powerful, and then at that point just give it as much data as you can, and you can expect it to do better if it sees more examples.
That makes sense. It's
Yeah.
the same with human beings.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think that's like you said a second ago, still where there's like a really big gap. I think that a lot of people believe in is that the amount of data that these things seem to require to get to that level of proficiency is like, it's kind of like very unreasonable compared to how much data like a human requires in its like early years to acquire some sort of intelligent behavior. So yes, I would say, I guess for us, like more data can keep always being useful, but we seem to do a lot more with a lot less still compared to these things that really just want a lot more.
Got it.
Yeah.
Wow. It's going to be interesting to see where the field, seeing what robots come out in the next 10 to 20 years.
Yes, it is. It is. Yeah. I'm curious to see what happens.
So were an undergrad at UC San Diego, and you're currently in a PhD program at MIT. How was going to Massachusetts and being in a PhD program? How was that for you? At least the initial part.
Pretty crazy. Definitely not casual, I would say. Like really fun. I've still really, I enjoyed it from the beginning, and I've still been enjoying it. But people aren't really lying when they talk about MIT being a pretty intense place. There's a lot going on, and there's a lot of intensely bright and passionate people. So there was, I mean, I was so happy, and like I can say, I guess, like proud of myself and excited about the opportunity to actually take that step up to like kind of a very high level place. But at the same time, showing up, I was like, oh my God, imposter syndrome, like crazy, like I don't know what I'm doing. I am so nervous and embarrassed about kind of knowing something about machine learning, but like not knowing nearly enough to actually do anything. So I just felt like I had to learn so much, and all that kind of stuff. So it was challenging at first. It was also challenging in the sense of I'm in two different labs, and one of them was brand new when I showed up. So I had to help basically start everything up from scratch with a few other of the first few students. So that was just really busy too. Um, yeah, I mean, I think that has sort of settled itself out quite a bit over the course of like second and now third year. But at the beginning, it was pretty challenging to feel like comfortable and like I actually belonged, and like I don't know, admissions committee hadn't like fumbled and made a mistake or something like that. Like I still felt like I had to prove myself, even though I was already there. Um, and I think honestly that was much more like I still felt like I needed to prove myself to myself. There was no one out there externally judging me or saying the things that I was saying to myself or that my mind was saying to myself. Actually, that surprised me, was that I thought it would be this like, oh, this is going to be so competitive in the culture or in the attitude of people, and that was really wrong. The community aspect here is kind of amazing in terms of how supportive everyone is. like everyone's really, really good and everyone has really, really high expectations of themselves. So it's not like easy to keep up, but at the same time, no one's like judging you if you're kind of having a hard time or if you don't know something. I think people have this general sense of trust that if you ended up here, you know something, and that if you don't know something, you can learn that thing if you need to learn it or if you want to learn it, like, relatively efficiently. So there's a lot of collaboration and just like, oh, hey, I want to learn more about this thing. And you're like an expert in that based on your research. Can we just chat? And can I like kind of try to learn something from you from just our discussion? So that part was great. And that part really helped me like a lot at the beginning, in feeling more comfortable. But yeah, it's nuts. And another thing that always would strike me is like when you're starting to get into research, you start hearing about kind of like the famous people in the field that have, a really long-standing reputation for doing good work, or have like really cool demos and papers that you think are awesome. Um, People come to MIT to give talks like all the time. We have these seminars for robotics, and we have seminars for computer vision, and seminars for like for graphics, and I mean all the fields. And like the best people in the world that are at other schools and places like come regularly to like give talks. And so you go to these talks and you're like, oh my god, there they are, like that world expert just came and I just listened to them in person, and they like dropped this incredible knowledge on me, and now I have to like think about it. And that part was awesome too. I really enjoyed getting to feel that, um, that's like this hub of where people want to go to disseminate their work. um, yeah, so I don't know, those are some things. It's hard as hell to do the first few years where you're trying to establish yourself as like a researcher, but you also still have to take classes. Um, so I mean, I'm now in the CS department, which was like the goal to like pivot away from Mechie and into like ECS. So then I'm like taking actual CS classes to like formally learn the stuff that I had kind of like taught myself over the years, and that was challenging to keep up in those courses, but also still be making meaningful research progress in the stuff I was starting to do. Um, so that was kind of a big deal at the end of the semester last year, was kind of wrapping up the bulk of the technical courses I have to take. So
Are you
now,
done with technical courses?
yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Nice. So you're just doing lab work and research?
Yeah. Yeah. I still have a few other requirements to finish. Like I have to TA and I have to do a minor, which will consist of 2 classes that have to be like similar-ish to each other and like just not in my main area. But like they don't really care about what grade you get in those classes, and
What are you
that
thinking?
um it's kind of out there. This is gonna like come out of left field probably, but I can take Harvard classes for those things, and Harvard has this like pretty world-renowned theology school called the
Nice.
Harvard Divinity School. So I'm I'm over the past several months, I've gotten a little bit into that space, and so most likely, that's the most clear idea in my mind right now, is like take some classes from the Divinity School.
What got you into this? What got you interested in that?
Um, I have kind of for a long time been interested in like various areas of philosophy. Specifically, I guess I started out studying like Stoicism, like Marcus Aurelius type stuff, and did a little bit of yoga in undergrad too, and would read like some kind of self-helpy type books that had all of it kind of integrated together into this vague notion of like spiritual but not religious.
Wellness.
Yeah, spiritual but not religious thing that I kind of had floating there for me for like a while, and that's kind of also how I was raised. Like my mom has that, but we're not we're not religious. We never went to church. She never imposed anything on me, but I just always kind of had this interest and sense that's like that there's really, really, really important and useful stuff to be learned from these schools of thought. And
Very old schools of thought.
sorry,
Very old schools of thought.
very old schools of thought. That's right, exactly. And then I was always kind of like on and off with that. Oh, and then I also got for the first time like into meditating also in undergrad. And that similarly was on and off with that. So those things were always there. And then at the end of 2020, end of 2020, so like a year ago, I guess like most people or like many people was feeling just kind of shitty about things.
Coronavirus.
Was a little depressed, with like coronavirus, and was feeling a little existential about grad school stuff. And I basically decided to get much more deeply committed to like the yoga practice that I had started out here when the new year was, so like when 2021 started. So like I started going to a Mysore class. I don't know. I think you do some yoga, but I don't know if you know about like the different
Types of yoga.
Yeah,
I
like
don't know if I've heard of that one.
have you heard
What's
of
it called?
Ashtanga?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's like they call it like the type of yoga is called Ashtanga, but then the classes they'll call it like Mysore classes, and that's named after the city where Ashtanga Yoga was created, where the guy was from. I had started doing that at the beginning of 2020, and then same thing with COVID. It's like, okay, stopped going to the studio, obviously, and was trying to keep up the practice at home, but had a pretty hard time being consistent with it. And so when the new year started, all these things kind of happened at once. I was feeling kind of depressed, and my stepdad's a family member gave me, I actually have it here, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, and she knew I was into that, and I basically was like, okay, I'm gonna get back into that Ashtanga practice, like seriously. Like it's kind of meant to be a little bit more intense than the usual way that people do yoga in the West, where the expectation is that you're practicing like minimum 3 days a week, but ideally like more like 5 or 6, and like first thing in the morning. So between those things, I just reconnected with those practices at the beginning of the year, and kind of kept that going in a big way for the first half of 2021 for the most part, and kept reading more books on various things related to like Eastern spiritual traditions, and trying to understand yoga better, and trying to meditate more. Like was really, really, really adamant about being consistent with like, meditate for like a good 15 minutes every single day, like do my yoga at least every single weekday, and read various books and stories that are kind of related to these topics. And I don't know, I just found like a lot of utility out of it for myself. And in parallel I've always listened to various podcasts from people like Sam Harris, who talk about meditation. And I mean, he's like a very like anti-religion person, but I kind of relate the idea of a meditative practice to, we can call it just like prayer, and like a genuine, authentic form of prayer, like something where you're connecting inwardly to your true self, your true nature, and not like just your animal ego, but something that allows you to see beyond that, and in terms of like connecting to other people in your life, and just the universe, and like life itself as a whole, that you're not separate from, but that you're just part of. All of that was really, really instrumental with me dealing with the difficult, I don't know, feelings I was having. And I've come to be really interested in the way that our generation has kind of moved away from religion. which I think that's like pretty unanimously agreed upon and known that that's the trend. Like less and less people are interested in the traditional notion of being part of a specific like organized religion, and like spiritual but not religious is becoming more and more common and prominent. But I think I'm interested in the hypothesis that that's created a little bit of a vacuum in our culture and the way that we relate to each other.
What do you mean?
Like there's a lot of both pros and cons, in my opinion, to these types of spiritual practices. I think the practices themselves are, I mean, just massively beneficial for helping you overcome the fluctuations of of your mind and your anxieties and your thoughts, and helping
Yes.
you operate in the world from a place of wholeness and love and um, connection with things outside of you, versus operating from a place of fear and survival and us versus them, like othering, um, self-serving versus like community oriented. Like I think the practices help you live your life in a way that's connected more communally, where you're part of a bigger thing, where you actually want the bigger thing to function better so that you can function better. However, I think on the flip side, the the thing where religion has been used poorly is like to impose morals and to control people and to make them fearful in other ways of things that might happen to them, and that therefore they must do if they want to, be considered acceptable, or worthy or better than some other group that some powerful people want to dominate, and so on and so forth. So I think it's been used in positive and negative ways, and I think that the way that we've been removing it from our society in terms of just like connecting to it in a real way has similarly probably had like both positive and negative impacts. So I think the positive side is that I think many times people seem to just be like a little bit more accepting of who you are, despite having maybe just like different backgrounds and beliefs. And there's less of a notion of like, oh, I believe a thing and it's right, and therefore I'm like better than you and what you believe, because those religions are just different. So I guess that's good, but I guess the vacuum I'm talking about is that, I don't know, maybe it's also removed our um us our way of having like a structured approach to connecting with each other in productive, healthy ways. Um, I think and connecting with ourselves in productive, healthy ways. I think you take out the communal aspect and you take out the practices that help you declutter your mind, and you kind of replace it maybe with other practices, spending a lot of time interacting with your phone and with the internet and with um, destructive influences, um, and in terms of how you then are having this cluttered mind because you don't have a way of calming it down, reducing the noisiness, like then how does that affect how you then go out there and operate in the world? Probably like way more hyperstimulated and way more feeling nervous and like self-conscious. And um, so yeah, so that's a big long spiel. Curious to hear what if you have any thoughts on this, because I think it seems like you're a little bit into some of these practices as well. So I don't know if you've ever thought about it
Absolutely.
yourself,
And
but yeah.
same thing as what you said, I think it's very similar to prayer. I remember Sam Harris once said something like, something can distress you very, very badly, and you can allow it to distress you for 3 weeks or 30 minutes. And, for someone who it's tough, when I first went into this practice, I have a meditation practice, I have a yoga practice. when I first began my meditation practice, I wouldn't do anything that wasn't just awareness, that just wasn't something that, if it was any sort of spirituality, I didn't really want to be a part of it.
Yeah.
But then, I started getting more aware. I started gaining focus, which is what we want. We want, we want to gain focus. We want to be less anxious. And then one day, someone got me very upset. And I was aware of how much this person upset me, and it was destroying me. I was like, oh my God, you upset me so much. And now I'm very aware of how you upset me. And that's when I realized this is a more than just awareness, more than just focus, more than just a, a mental tool to, get a higher productivity out of myself. It's so that, and through that, I began a loving kindness practice. There's a loving kindness meditation. And that is like, a huge deal, to take in someone, they upset you, they did something that you don't necessarily like, but you just take it, and then you don't necessarily impose your opinion, get super anxious, like you said, like get hyper anxious, and kind of make yourself, you know maybe they upset you, and then the first thing, like our animal ego's first reaction is, now you got to upset them, and that won't lead anywhere productive. So I completely agree, and it has been interesting, and I think, we're Californians. There's very, religion in California is, not doing great, it, for young people especially.
Mm.
So we grew up in this very secular environment, and I think, we take into account like the mental health epidemic within the country. We take into account, I don't know how it is in Boston, but the homeless situation in California, for the three major cities in California, has just gotten to a point where, it's crazy. I think Los Angeles right now is in a violent, there's a series of violent riots going on. I don't know if that has to do with homelessness, but again, like, people are upset. People aren't necessarily happy. I was that happy. Um, End of 2020 was a very tough time for me too, and I think that community, like you said, we can be more in tune with ourselves, but also more in tune with our community. And being more in tune with our community, that is huge. I mean, I think that could, that leads to, we're more likely to have more opportunities. We're more likely to be happier. We're more likely to, I mean, going through a day and not speaking to someone is very depressing. And even having something like a 15 to 20-minute conversation with an individual, which isn't easy, to just see someone and then speak with them, it's huge. And I think these old schools of thought, and these lessons, they're not naturally intuitive. Like, I didn't, know many of these things. I kind of had to be, you had that book which your stepdad's family member gave you, and I have an app, a meditation app that has lessons in it. So they have a video lesson and then the app, and the lesson is critical
Yeah.
because, yes, because even with that awareness, even with all of this, like it's hard to put words to emotions, words to feelings, and it's hard to know how to respond to them. And these, ancient schools of thought, and like you said, there can be issues with them, which I'll point to in a minute, but these ancient schools of thought can put some, great tools for us to, and they're not outdated. This can be 2,500 years old and it's not outdated. And if we are able to take in that knowledge, take in those lessons and apply them, maybe they don't work out for us, but I think at least attempting to apply them, we can find, you know, more joy, less stress, less anxiousness, not allowing everything around us to demoralize us. Like, you know, you're in a PhD program and that can be incredibly stressful, I'm sure. And having your practice, how do you think that's helped?
I mean, it's everything. Like, honestly, at this point, more often than not, I think in the framework of everything in my life right now, including work and school, has to fit within the parameters of the practice. And always before that, it was like the other way around. It was like, oh, I effectively worship my professional goals and am going to only allow other things to exist in my life if they are compatible with that main thread of things that I am a value and am focused on. Now it's by necessity, or at first by necessity, and now out of just like pure like joy and love for the practice, it's like basically inverted. Um, and there were moments earlier in the year when it started, like you're talking about, when at first it's like, okay, this is just about me trying to focus. What it really was for me was working from home during the pandemic completely derailed my ability to like do what I thought I knew how to do in terms of just work and be productive and get things done. And that like really fucked me up. I was like, I felt like the ground was removed from under me. And so at first the meditation thing was like, okay, just get back to the basics of like being able to have an attention span. And then things start going further and you start making connections in your head and you start feeling real things and having real internal experiences where you're like, I can't I can't unexperience the thing that I just felt. And therefore I don't think I can ever like walk away from this as a tool to depend on. uh,
No.
I sent an email. The cool thing about Ashtanga Yoga is that you do the same sequence of postures every single time.
Oh, wow.
So you learn it step by step. So I fortunately getting to have done it for the first 3 months of 2020, I learned up to, some amount of it. And then that's what I was doing on my own at home when I got back into this. And when things were just really clicking and working and I was feeling the like God, just better and more connected to like myself than I maybe ever have. Um, I had no choice but to like send an email to the teacher of the yoga class. And I was like, "Hey, I know I haven't like seen you in over a year now because of this pandemic, but like I just want to tell you that what I've learned from just those few little months in the beginning of Ashtanga, like and the combination of that plus getting back to like a consistent meditative practice is like has literally been life changing over the past few months. And I feel like it's going to be something that I never let go of for the rest of my life. So it's like it has that much weight for me personally nowadays. Um, and and there's weird kind of discomfort with that, honestly, because like you said, we did grow up in such a secular thing. And even the people I knew that had semi-religious families, like they always seemed to dismiss
Yes.
taking it seriously and actually getting value out of it. So I don't know. I feel like there's something. weird at the surface level about going back in that direction or like discovering it at this point in life. But I'm trying to just own it and learn more about it, both for myself, but also about it in the context of how it can, I don't know, help us more broadly. Like when I think about myself working on robotics and just in engineering and technology space, like robots are cool. I get excited when I see robots doing cool stuff and when I get to build a cool demo. So that's why I'm doing this for the most part right now, is because I think it's interesting. Zooming out a lot, do I think that technology is the right thing to keep helping us solve the problems that we have in our world? Like, my take on this is like, for sure, no. I think the vast majority of our problems that we have as individuals and as societies are like human problems. They're no longer technology problems. Like technology has like so outpaced our ability to just deal with each other and
Yes.
deal with ourselves. And so I'm just, I don't know, I'm just interested in that, how a revamp of these 2,000-3,000-year-old traditions that, like you say, are useful for solving things that are not new. Like we've had to deal with these things going all the way back to those times. How do we take those things and, I don't want to say revamp them, but like find ways to reintegrate the good parts of them, um, so that we can actually move forward in healthier ways, and both for ourselves and as communities. I personally think it's like that heavy. um, yeah, I I don't take it that lightly anymore. At first, I was like, oh yeah, it's like kind of a casual thing, but like I think there's something deeper to it that can be really important. So, um, however, I have also been struggling with some aspect of it as well, and I'm curious of your take on this, because there have been times where I have felt so at peace and like taken care of by the practice that I'm like, shit, well, where does this end? Like, if this is going this well, I should probably just keep taking the next step of going deeper and deeper into this. But at some point, what that maybe requires you to do is turn your back on modern society and go be a monk on a mountain and
Yes.
forego all worldly pleasures and materials and shave your head, give away all your clothes, and go literally meditate all day. Like, and that's, I mean, that's fine. People do that and they get a lot out of that. But somehow that's been the point where I get confused for myself, because I then feel like, okay, is that actually right for me to leave the people I know and leave like the other things that I'm involved in? Um, is there not a way to live in the world and yet still be connected to these things that keep you sane? Um, so that's one of the big things that I'm fascinated by in terms of continuing to just deal with. And I don't know if you've ever thought about that side of things.
I
Of,
have.
yeah.
I in 2018 did a meditation retreat for 7 days, and it was tough. I mean, day two, day three, I was like, I need to leave. I should go be, working right now. I can't believe I'm taking paid time off for this.
Wow.
And
Was it like a
there were
silent, was it like a silent one?
it wasn't silent. It was yeah, it was not silent. It was I forgot what type. I think they call it I forgot what type of meditation, but it's not silent and it's based in utility based meditation. There were probably 20 plus monks there and then maybe 15 plus nuns. And I was thinking that too. It's like, should I, like, be here? Is this like my thing? Am I possibly a monk? And going on that retreat answered that question, and it's absolutely no.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yes, because, you see the way they live, and you see kind of like, you know, it's tough if you feel like, or at least this is how I thought about it. If I felt like I had nothing to offer the world other than promoting spirituality and promoting meditation practice, then yes. Then, if I had nothing else, if I, for some reason, the only opportunity I had left in this world was to go be a monk, then I would do it. But, you, me, we have a lot to offer the world. And, you know, I think even one of those monks said there, he said this, he was like, wouldn't you want the president of the United States to be a meditator? Wouldn't you want the top general in the US military to have a meditation practice? And it's that, yes, I would. And that's when they said that, it's like, okay, it's not about us, immersing ourselves in there. It's about, us bringing that into our lives
Yeah.
and kind of reverberating it outwards. So that's my opinion. I think, you and I, we have too much to offer our communities, our world, the people around us, and it's irresponsible. Maybe not. Maybe if we felt like, I don't if we felt like we're in a place where we need this for ourselves, then that's different. And I can understand that if someone's like very mentally distressed, can't really work, can't really like live their life properly, then maybe for a bit that could be what you do. But I've thought about it. It's a good feeling. And I don't know if you've gone through this, but my meditation practice in 2018 was really strong. It
Mm.
was really strong. And it's faltered since then. I think in the last 3 or 4 months, I've improved it, but it's also very interesting to see losing awareness because
Yeah.
I can, it's stress. It's not stressful, it's disheartening.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, well, hang on. I want to get to that, but just to comment on the thing you said of that retreat and the takeaways you had, I think you put that really well, really, really well. And I want to say it's kind of an amazing feeling to like have this conversation with you about this, because like we have kind of the similar background where we've lived in the world and then we've found this and now we're trying to find ways to integrate it. I've felt kind of very lonely in searching in this space, because I feel like anything you read in a book, Patanjali, like that type of stuff, like they're kind of not advocating for the monk life, but like they're coming from that perspective. And so finding people to like learn from and talk to about this stuff that are actually have the more updated modern goal of an integration, um, that's that's huge. So I mean, that's so cool that that person said that of, wouldn't you want the president or the general or, the CEO of whatever powerful company to have a spiritual and slash meditative practice. That's you put that so well, or they put that so well, and you did too.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's basically been kind of my takeaway so far. But I'm finding I still need to more deeply integrate it in my intuitive day-to-day like belief system, that so in a way that I'm actually like solidly comfortable with it, because there's still days where I like doubt it and I go in either direction, where I'm like tempted to get back into the work mode, and like you say, like that leads to a weakening of the practice and a loss of the awareness, or the other way around, where I just want to kind of use it as a way to hide from my worldly problems. You know what I
Which it
mean?
can be.
Yeah, which it can really it can function very well as that, but that it isn't necessarily going to help you in the long run. Um, so that's a really great way that you put it. Um, in terms of the fluctuations of your connection to the practice, yeah, that's been something that has just constantly fascinated me. Is that it's not enough to know that these practices exist and to have read about them once and then to be like, okay, yeah, now I know about these ideas. Like the practice itself is the thing that changes the game. And it is always such a mind fuck to see it go in both directions when you are being really solid with it and you're having those times where it's like the
Yes.
like you're like, I didn't know that was possible to have such a, I don't know, profound internal experience. And then in the other direction where you are losing it, and by its nature of the fact that you're losing it, like at first you're not even aware that you are,
Oh,
but then you get a little bit of it back and you realize that you kind of dropped a bit, and you're like, oh,
yes.
like here I go again, like kind of thinking what it always was for me when I was kind of very off and on about it starting out, was like I would use it, I would get really involved in it when I felt not good, and it would be like, okay, I'm feeling better, I'm feeling better, I'm feeling better. Okay, I feel pretty good now. I guess I'm okay without it. And then remove it and think that I can just now function. But then what starts to happen without you even realizing it is, so then it just becomes cyclical. And so at the beginning of this year, I was like, all right, I'm going to be kind of militant about this in,
Nice.
in terms of keeping it up. Um, even when I feel like I don't need it or don't want it because I'm already good. Like it was like, no, just fucking do it anyway, bro.
Yes.
Like, and you never regret it.
No.
You never
No.
feel like, oh no, I should, that was a waste of time. Like 100% success rate in terms of like, okay, that was worth it.
I
Um,
th- I think, no matter how much time you put in, you're going to regain that time later in the day.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So that was where I was at too at the beginning of the year. I have also since faltered a bit on the meditation side, because once things lightened up with the pandemic and my yoga studio actually reopened, I started going back in person, and therefore have started to keep learning more and more of the practice. It's pretty long. Like people study Ashtanga for like decades because there's so much, you can go so deep in it. There's like primary, secondary, third, fourth, fifth, whatever series. And it just keeps getting more advanced. So you get up to a point where the practice is taking you, 90 plus minutes, and
Wow.
and then I drive now because I'm not doing it at home, and so I drive back and forth. So that has ended up taking more time in the mornings than it was when I was doing both at home, and there for that reason I've felt less confident about the time, getting the time back thing, because I'm like, oh man, I'm already spending more time, but it's being spent on yoga, so like maybe it's fine because yoga has the meditative stuff with it. Um, so it's been okay, but I will say I still just feel better when I can do like both in their entirety. Um,
What do you mean both?
like I can do the physical, I can do the asanas, but then I can sit there and do my 15-minute pure meditation that doesn't involve any physicality. Ideally, you can do both, but for more recently, I've been doing less of the pure meditation in favor of trying to be more consistent on the yoga side.
That makes sense. And a couple of things is like yoga is great exercise. So it's like if you're able to get your awareness practice in with, some solid exercise, that's a huge win.
Yeah.
And then I think doing it, yoga class, like I don't go to yoga classes too often, but that's only because I'm not very good at like being there at 9 sharp.
Mhm.
But I think practicing with others is way more rewarding, way more fun.
Yeah. That's a big part of it that I was so happy to get back to when things opened up, like in May, was just getting to reconnect with the other people that stay committed to that practice, because just getting to see them day in, day out it's great. It's great. And we do a little bit of chanting. I still need to like learn more of the chants, but even having that too, like having just the room start reverberating with everyone
It's good. It's
chanting
like,
together, it's really nice. It's really nice. So yeah. Speaking of exercise though, like I'm curious for you, I just glancing at like your Instagram, you do the yoga, but you do some other stuff too that seems more like strength building
yes,
oriented. Has that been
yes,
something that you think is like important, of like complementing the types of exercise that yoga offers with stuff that's more strength building?
yes, because I did yoga exclusively and I was ripped up when I did it. So it was okay in 2018. Like 2018, I was doing bunch of meditation. I was militant about it in 2018. I was doing 80 minutes of meditation a day, 30 minutes of yoga a day, and I think 40 minutes of walking meditation a day.
Wow.
And it was crazy. I don't know, like that's why I say like I dropped off, because I don't do those numbers at all. And like 80 minutes of meditation a day is
That
not.
I mean, I've never even come close to that. In terms of the meditation, that's wild. Yeah.
Yes. And like, but I was traveling a lot too. So like, if I was in a plane, that's, I can if I'm on a 9-hour plane ride, I can meditate for 2 hours in that plane.
Yeah.
And but yes, going back to the point, I was doing a lot of, I was in a rock climbing gym. So rock climbing, yoga, and walking.
Yeah.
And I just felt like I was getting, like, I wasn't very, like, I was getting really lean,
Yeah.
but I wasn't like developing so much muscle. So I think it's a good balance,
Yeah.
but still, I mean, yoga is the primary, I think. I think the alleviation, I think the movement aspect is huge. Like
Yeah.
moving our body. It's for like weightlifting, you can only move. There's only a small movement and it's going to be intense, but it's only a small movement.
Yeah.
And if that's our only workout, then we're not actually moving very much.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I do strength training, but it's very calculated and it's never, sometimes it's big reps, but usually it's like medium weight, medium reps.
I see. Yeah. Yeah. I haven't done any strength training in years now. But with getting really into the yoga, like that has gotten me at least like more fit and using my body like to a great extent on a consistent basis, which is great. The thing that I've become a little bit frustrated with the practice, and I don't know if it's just because it's the way Ashtanga is set up, is there's a lot of pressing. So I mean,
Oh,
of course,
yes.
there's tons of like flexibility you're building, but on the strength side, there's a bunch of vinyasa, like jump through, jump back stuff. And so, I mean, that's great for like the upper chest and the shoulders and the arms. But what I get concerned about is that it's not getting balanced enough with like stuff that's strengthening your back and like
No.
opening up the chest. Um, So that's something I've become much more perceptive of recently is just what are ways to like balance that out, because otherwise, too much pressing, I think everyone knows that, who's like been into weightlifting at any point in their lives. You do too much shoulder pressing and bench pressing, like that'll mess with your shoulders in a big way. So
Yes.
trying to avoid
And
that.
a lot of vinyasas, I mean, if we do like a bunch of vinyasas, that can be pretty intense on our
Yeah,
shoulders as well.
exactly. Yeah. And I mean that there's a lot of that in Ashtanga, a lot. Um, so gotta, hedge against that becoming imbalanced.
And the one thing I was doing in 2018, and I'm still doing it now, is rock climbing subsetting with the yoga. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like the rock climbing is the pole. I mean,
Yeah,
I think yoga does everything except for the pole.
exactly. That's right. It's missing poles, but that's a great point. Rock climbing is like the perfect complement to that. Yeah.
Yes. Or, if you get a pull up bar, then,
Yeah.
but yeah. So, Anthony, are there any last words you'd like to tell our audience?
Um, shoot, man. I don't know. Uh, I don't think so. I know we went a bit over the time, so
No, it was great.
happy to wrap it up. Um, I don't know. Yeah, no, it's just great to hear from you. I I think it's cool that you are sharing things with the world, both in terms of this little podcast thing, but also just the stuff that you share on Instagram. I admire people who feel, I don't know, comfortable just sharing things and expressing themselves in genuine ways. And it's something I want to do more of. So that's just one little piece, is like a little message of admiration for the way that you navigate that, and you do it pretty nicely. I appreciated not only getting to have seen you doing that, but also be involved with it in our conversation today. It was really nice.
Thank you. My guest today has been Anthony Simeonov. Thanks for coming on the podcast, Anthony.
Sure thing. Thanks, Karush.